there are any number of major video game events happening over the course of a given year. So things like E3, GDC, Gamescom, PAX, Tokyo Game Show, things like that. But in the run-up to those events, there are often a number of smaller events that happen, and this week is one such week. Tokyo Game Show is happening as we speak, and in the run-up to that, there were a number of smaller events, and that's what we're going to cover today. Hi, I'm Rob, and welcome to Gossy News, and we're going to dive straight in because there is a lot of stuff to cover. I will mainly be focusing on the things that I personally found interesting, rather than every single title. So keeping those things in mind, let's start off with the Disney Marvel Showcase, which felt like it was an afterthought to the D23 Expo, but we're not going to get into that because that's a different story. Instead, we're going to focus on the games. As I said, I am mainly going to focus on the ones that I found interesting. So the three from here that I did actually find interesting were Tron Identity, which seems to be a detective game set in the Tron universe. After that, there's an unnamed Marvel title, which apparently will include Black Panther and Captain America, and it's being developed by Skydance Media. Amy Hennig, the writing mastermind behind franchises like Legacy of Kain and Uncharted, is the brains behind this game, so that actually gets me excited for that game. The last game that kind of caught my attention, but not as much as the other two, was Disney Speedstorm, which basically is a kart racer. I'm not really a big fan of kart racers, but the developer for this game is Gameloft, and it's being released on console and PC. Now, Gameloft have some experience with racing games. In fact, they're the developers of the Asphalt series on mobile platforms, and I do really like Asphalt Legends, and that's the main reason this one caught my attention. As for the rest of the games, there's Disney Illusion Island for the Nintendo Switch, which is a co-op platformer starring Mickey Mouse and his friends. There's Marvel Snap, which is a card battler. And there is World of Heroes on mobile platforms, which is an augmented reality game developed by Niantic. And that will probably involve a lot of people running around waving their hands in the air like they don't care. I doubt it's going to be anywhere near as popular as Pokemon Go, though. So, moving on to Ubisoft Forward, which also happened, and I will be honest, this one was a bit of a trial for me. I'm not the biggest fan of Assassin's Creed, so to basically be clubbed over the head with a number of Assassin's Creed games because apparently it's the 15th anniversary of Assassin's Creed, that felt like too much of a chore. Now, you may be wondering, how many Assassin's Creed games are they releasing? Well, there is Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is the next mainline release, and that apparently is set in 9th century Baghdad. Now, it may be that by returning to that time period, Ubisoft are hoping that they can rekindle the magic of the Assassin's Creed franchise by tapping into the roots of the whole idea of Assassins, the Hashishim or Hashashin, whatever you want to call them. There are different ways of pronouncing that. Basically, the religious order or cult that later became known as Assassins during the Crusades when they kept killing Christian leaders. As I said, I'm not the biggest Assassin's Creed fan, but I am looking forward to this one, as I am Codename Red, which is apparently going to be set in feudal Japan. It's a new game that's being developed by Ubisoft Quebec. There's also a Codename Jade, which is apparently an open-world RPG for mobile, and that is going to be set in ancient China. I'm really curious about that one because I'm still not sold on the whole idea of an Assassin's Creed game on mobile platforms being able to work that well with touch controls, but we'll see. I am keeping an open mind about it. There is also a codename Hex, which is being developed by Ubisoft Montreal. Apparently that one is going to have slightly more horror tones to it. Not sure how that's going to work. And finally, there's Assassin's Creed Infinity, which apparently isn't a game. Instead, it's a platform that's going to allow fans to access both past and future Assassin's Creed games, with the series' present-day meta-story now planned to be delivered through that hub. I don't honestly believe that the Assassin's Creed franchise requires its own launcher or hub for all of the games. It does honestly feel like Ubisoft have cornered themselves by doing so much Assassin's Creed. They have so many other franchises that they could be focusing on and developing new games for. They have a new Mario and Rabbids game, but that's pretty much it. Everything else that they had in the showcase was not a new title or a revision of an older thing. And that just doesn't feel healthy for a major company like Ubisoft. It feels like they're stagnating. They're basically falling back onto things that they've done before that they knew worked and hoping that'll save their bacon now. It won't. Instead of developing new games and new titles or bringing older games back into the public eye by making new updated versions of them, basically what they did with Rayman. Rayman Legends was an amazing game, but everyone had basically written Rayman off as a dead franchise before then. That's the kind of thing that Ubisoft need to be doing if they want to stay relevant, instead of lots of Assassin's Creed, because, I'm sorry, but it's boring. That's why I'm not interested in playing Assassin's Creed games. I find them dull. Anyway, moving on to another little showcase that I didn't know happened, which is the ID at Xbox showcase. Now, as you might expect, a lot of the Xbox showcase was dedicated to the games that are coming out on Game Pass. One of them was Evil, which is a multiplayer social deduction game. It's a bit like Among Us, but set in a medieval fantasy town with better graphics and character models and everything like that. Another one that caught my attention, not because of what it is, but more because of what it reminded me of. It's called Homestead Arcana, and it's yet another farming simulation game, this time kind of mixing the Old West with fantasy, and the game that it reminds me of is actually Weird West, which did exactly the same thing, only that one's darker and more brutal. The sequel to Song of Iron 2, is also coming to Game Pass. It's yet another merciless run-and-gun melee combat game. Turnip Boy Robs a Bank, which is the sequel to Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, which, weirdly, I actually kind of like. So I am looking forward to Turnip Boy Robs a Bank, where he's going to be teaming up with the fearsome Pickled Gang to stage the weirdest heist of all time. The new Ghostbusters game, Spirits Unleashed, is quite an interesting take on the whole idea, as it looks like it's going to play a bit like Evolve, in that 4 people are going to play the role of the Ghostbusters, while the 5th person will take on the role of the spectral nuisance that they have to capture. There's a 2D non-linear platform combat game called Moonscars, which caught my attention mainly because of the black, red and white motif that it's got going on, and the fact that it looks a lot like Salt and Sanctuary and other games of that ilk, and I'm a big fan of those types of game. And that was pretty much it for the games that I found interesting in the upcoming games. There was a little bit of focus on some of the games that are currently available on Game Pass. It seems fairly lackluster, I know, but then again, it is just a showcase, not an actual event-based thing. Moving on to Nintendo, now there was a bit of controversy about the Nintendo Direct, and the main reason for that was because Nintendo basically announced that they weren't going to live stream the Direct in the UK because they were showing respect to Queen Elizabeth II, who sadly passed away. But they were going to release the Direct an hour later so that you could watch it whenever you wanted. And that's just really weird and confusing. I'm not sure who made this decision, because you're not really showing respect to anyone by doing it that way. Anyway, regardless of all that, we're going to dive straight into the Direct, and we're going to start off with GoldenEye. We have just been talking about the Xbox, and GoldenEye is a great little transition game because it's coming out on Game Pass and on the Switch. GoldenEye HD, which is coming out for the Switch and Xbox Game Pass, has multiplayer exclusive to the Switch, but not available on Game Pass. And again, we have a really confusing decision. I can understand multiplayer on the Switch, fine, totally down with it, but not having multiplayer on the Game Pass version is just beyond me. Now, I know that the Game Pass version has its own little things that make it better, but I would forego those for the multiplayer, because multiplayer on PC or console is generally going to give me more enjoyment out of the game than some crappy little trophy or some crappy little collectible that I can get in the game. That wasn't the only thing that was announced at the Direct. There were all sorts of other things, all sorts of games coming to the Switch. Things like Octopath Traveler 2, Resident Evil 2, 3, 7, and Village, It Takes Two, Tunic, Crisis Core Final Fantasy 7, a whole bunch of N64 games. Shigeru Miyamoto announced Pikmin 4, which a lot of people are looking forward to. But then they capped it off with a trailer for the sequel to Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is called Tears of the Kingdom. And when I saw that, then I understood why they delayed it by an hour for the UK, especially with the Queen passing away. It was a strange decision, but I can understand the title of the game, Tears of the Kingdom. And yes, it is Tears of the Kingdom, not Tears of the Kingdom, as I've seen some people suggest. How do I know this? Well, think about it logically. Use the grey matter inside your skull for a change. Don't just assume because you think it means something. Think about everything that happened in the first game, Breath of the Wild. Think about the fact that they basically cancelled the live stream in the UK because the Queen of England had passed away. It's most definitely Tears of a Kingdom. Leaving that to one side, and we're going to head over to Sony for the PlayStation State of Play. And again, there was a lot of stuff to cover. There's a new sci-fi third-person shooter called Sin Duality from Bandai Namco. There's Stellar Blade, which used to be called Project Eve, and a lot of people probably know the look of the game more than they know the name. It's that game that has the lass wearing the green and white plug suit, effectively, from Neon Genesis Evangelion, and wielding a katana as she goes around slaying big monsters and stuff like that in a weird post-apocalyptic-esque sci-fi setting. There's also a new Team Ninja game called Rise of the Ronin, which does look interesting. I will be honest, I am looking forward to that. There was Pacific Drive, which looks like a weird post-apocalyptic survival horror type game where you drive around in your car trying to escape cosmic storms and all sorts of weird creatures and stuff like that. I am actually quite interested in Pacific Drive, especially as it's out on the PSVR 2. Now, Sony have confirmed that the PSVR 2 will not be backwards compatible with the PSVR because of higher fidelity rates and things like that. There are some big changes between the original and version 2. There was a new trailer for a quest in Hogwarts 2, which loads of people misread and thought, hang on, is Harry Potter doing a survival horror? Which would be amazing. A Harry Potter survival horror would be a fantastic idea. So, if anyone wants to make that, do it. There was the new trailer for God of War Ragnarok, which looks fascinating. I'm personally a fan of mythology, and I do like the take on Norse mythology from God of War. I really want to know what happens in the sequel. I really want to know how the story of Kratos and his son progresses. So, looking forward to that one, definitely. The last one that I want to focus on is also one of my favourite video game franchises of all time, and that is the Yakkuza franchise. So, the last game in the Yakkuza franchise, Like a Dragon, marked a big departure from the original games because Kazuma Kiryu was no longer the lead character, and this is where it gets interesting. There was a summit for the Yakkuza franchise, basically the Ryuga Gotoku summit, which happened to be for the PlayStation State of Play. And I was not aware that this was an actual thing. It's one of those stories in video games where you don't really believe that there's such a thing until you encounter it in real life. And yes, there is a Ryuga Gotoku summit. I don't know why there's one, but there is. And they take it very seriously. So what was announced at this summit? Well, the sequel to Yakkuza Like a Dragon 2, was announced. It was also announced that they're going to be ditching the word Yakkuza in the title, and it's going to return to its original nomenclature, Like a Dragon, which then gets me interested in the 7th game, Yakkuza Like a Dragon, because that effectively is the transition. They showed the trailer for Yakuza 8, which also has Kazuma Kiryu teaming up with Ichiban. But I'm really confused by the character design for Kiryu. I know that the Yakuza games can be wacky and enjoyable fun, but why would you basically make him look like he's in really bad witness protection with a Korean K-pop band? which in turn gets me speculating about another game from the Yakkuza franchise, another spin-off called Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. And apparently that's going to focus on Kazuma Kiryu, so maybe I'm right about the really bad witness protection. I don't know. Anyway, the last game from the Ryuga Gotoku Summit and the PlayStation State of Play was Like a Dragon Ishin, which is an older game, but it's been totally redone like the Kiwami games for the new consoles. I'm really looking forward to this, because Like a Dragon Ishin was never released in the West. Now, the game itself is set in 1867 in a city called Kyo, which is a fictionalized version of Kyoto. It's set during the Meiji Restoration and the downfall of the shogunate. Ishin is one of those games that lets you experience how the age of the samurai basically ended, the advent of guns and things like that. It's a very interesting period of history in Japan, and it's nice when games try to reflect that. Anyway, that's about it for the shows. Some quick bits of news to finish the episode off. Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal have taken control of several gaming IPs from the previous owner Square Enix, including Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and Legacy of Kain. But here's the question. Those IP are effectively owned by Embracer Group, not by Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal, unless Embracer Group have signed the rights for those IPs back to them. I'm not privy to what the discussions are behind the scenes or anything like that, but as far as I understand it, the rights are still held by Embracer Group, but Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal can basically make the games because they're still part of Embracer Group themselves. I'll keep watching this space and see if anyone can actually work out what's going on. Okay, our penultimate story. Koei, Tecmo and EA are partnering for the next great hunting game. Now, this is apparently going to be an original IP, which Koei Tecmo and Omega Force are going to be making in partnership with Electronic Arts. The game itself is going to be set in feudal Japan, and as soon as I saw all of these details, my first thought was Tokiden, because that's the only game, the only franchise that I can think of that people would relate to another hunting game called Monster Hunter. And I think I should clarify, when they're talking about hunting game, they do mean Monster Hunter. They don't mean Cabela's Big Adventure or whatever you want to call them. And now we're at the final story, and Genshin Impact fans rejoice, because you will get your anime series. Not only will you get it, it's also going to be produced by Ufotable. It's probably obvious to a lot of people that Genshin Impact fans are in a bit of a tizzy because of the announcement of the anime. Not just the announcement of the adaptation, but the studio that's doing the animation and the production of the series is Ufotable, who I have a lot of respect for, especially after the work they did on Garden of Sinners and the Fate Zero series and things like that. They've done a lot of good work. They're very good at big name productions like this, so really looking forward to seeing how that works out. And with that, we're at the end of the episode. Let me know which games you were focusing on from the showcases from this week. I'll be back on the next episode of Ghostly News, where I'll be probably covering the Tokyo Game Show in as much detail as I can within the time allotted. So I'll probably again be focusing on the games that I personally would want to play. Now that that's said, it's time for me to leave, it's time for you to leave, it's time for everyone to leave. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.